Today, we're going to crack open a literary puzzle that's been stumping people for more than 2,000 years. It's an incredible story about hope, about coming home and rebuilding from scratch. But man, the way it's put together, it can feel, well, pretty chaotic.
So here's the big question, the real mystery we're diving into. When you read about the Jewish people returning from exile in Babylon, you run into three separate accounts that seem to cover the exact same events. It's this weird echo in history, and honestly, it's had scholars and readers scratching their heads for centuries. So what is really going on here?
Okay, so this chart really lays it all out. See on the left, that's 1 Esdras, a book from the Greek version of the Bible. Its chapters are almost like a remix, pulling sections from 2 Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. You're seeing the same events, the same names, just shuffled around and put in a totally different package.
Look, if you've ever tried to read these books and just felt completely lost, you are not alone. The timeline seems to jump all over the place, characters pop up again, and you got entire lists of people repeated word for word. It's so easy to look at this and just think, wow, this is a mess. Did anyone even edit this thing? But what if that confusion isn't a mistake? What if it's the first clue to a much, much deeper meaning?
All right, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to put on our detective hats and start with the manuscripts themselves. Let's dig into the history of how these texts were actually handed down to us.
Okay, so here it is, our first huge clue. What we think of today as 2 separate books, Ezra and Nehemiah, they were originally one, a single unified scroll. And right away, that simplifies things a ton. We're not dealing with 3 totally separate stories, but really one main story and this other version. And get this? This timeline shows you just how new that split really is. For more than 1,500 years, everyone treated Ezra and Nehemiah as a single work. The separation we see in most Bibles today didn't become the standard until the 1500s with the invention of the printing press. So this isn't some ancient division from the original authors. It's basically a modern choice made for print.
Okay, so Ezra and Nehemiah are one story. That's a huge step. But that still leaves us with this mysterious third book, right? 1 Esdras? Where on earth did it come from? And why does it even exist?
So this is where it gets really interesting, because scholars are totally split. It's that classic, what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of debate. One theory says 1 Esdras is just a summary, a sort of greatest hits album put together later from the books we already know. But the other theory, and this is the wild part, suggests that 1 Esdras might be a peek into an even older version of the story, a source that the final version of Ezra Nehemiah also used. The puzzle just keeps getting deeper.
But you know what? Let's take a step back. Instead of getting bogged down in which manuscript is older, what if we ask a totally different question? What if this strange structure isn't a mistake at all? What if it's a message? Let's check out the grand blueprint.
This is the real game changer. See, the person who put Ezra and Nehemiah together wasn't thinking like a modern historian. They weren't just listing facts in order. They were more like a theologian, maybe even an artist, arranging these historical events to make a really powerful point about faith and starting over.
And this right here is the aha moment. The consensus among scholars now is that the whole thing is arranged by theme, not by date. The events aren't in the order they happened, but in an order that builds a specific theological argument. The structure is the story. So what is that structure? What's the message?
It breaks down into this amazing 3-part mission. Think of it like this. First, you have Zerubbabel, and his job is to rebuild the actual temple, the heart of their worship. Then Ezra shows up, and his mission is to rebuild the people. He's purifying the community, getting them back to the law, and then finally, Nehemiah comes in to rebuild the walls, to make the city secure. So you've got temple, people, city. It's a very deliberate 1-2-3 punch.
But this whole 3-part plan, it's all pointing to something way bigger. It's about redefining one of the most important ideas in the whole Bible, what the house of God actually means.
And this is so important. These weren't just 3 different items on a to-do list. The author weaves them all together to show that they're actually one big, overarching mission, to completely rebuild the house of God after everything was destroyed.
And this right here is the author's genius move. The house of God suddenly isn't just a building anymore. It becomes this whole living concept. Yeah, it's the physical temple, for sure, but it's also the people, the pure community that worships there. And it's the city, the safe, holy place where they all live. You need all 3. You can't have one without the others.
It's just like the scholar George Van Pelt Campbell says. It's about restoring full spiritual vitality. The bricks and mortar are just a symbol for something way deeper, the spiritual renewal of the entire nation, and that was the author's real goal.
So you see, what looked like a total mess at the beginning, a jumbled, confusing story, is actually this incredibly sophisticated blueprint. It's a roadmap for how a community can pull itself out of a crisis, not just by rebuilding walls, but by rebuilding its spirit and its identity. It shows that real recovery means taking care of your worship, your people, and your shared home.
So, where does that leave us? What's the takeaway? This ancient story isn't just about solving some old literary puzzle. It's this timeless message of hope and renewal that honestly speaks so powerfully to us today.
You know, I saw a user on Reddit put this perfectly. They said the real message is that even after being punished, after exile and persecution, God's love is never taken away. And in the end, there's always return, restoration, and redemption. It's this powerful promise that there's always a way back.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. What looked like a bunch of confusing, overlapping texts, it's actually one unified story with a brilliant theological design. The whole mission was to rebuild the house of God, which we now know means the temple, the people, and the city. So this isn't just history, it's a timeless guide for spiritual renewal, for finding hope again. The big theme here is that God's promises of restoration always hold true.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? This ancient blueprint shows that real renewal requires rebuilding our sacred spaces, purifying our communities, and making sure everyone feels safe. So the question for us is, what does it mean to rebuild the house of God in our own time?